What if I told you a farmer built the world's fastest car in a tin shed for $10,000 while his competitors spent millions? Art Arfons did exactly that. With classified military parts, they said he could not own. On October 5, 1964, a homemade car built in a tin shed shot across the Bonneville Salt Flats at speeds nobody believed possible. Inside sat Art Arfons, a backyard mechanic from Ohio who had just spent $600 on a broken jet engine the United States military said he could not have. Within minutes, he would become the fastest man on Earth. His secret weapon was not money or engineers or fancy equipment. It was junk. This is the story of how a farmer from Akron, Ohio, built the world's fastest car using scrap metal, junkyard parts, and a jet engine that should never have left a military scrapyard. It is the story of Art Arfons, the junkyard genius who reached 576 miles per hour, or 927 kilometers per hour, and changed racing forever. Arthur Eugene Arfons was born on February 3, 1926, in Akron, Ohio. His father, Tom Arfons, had arrived in America from Greece at age 14, with almost nothing in his pockets. His mother, Bessie, was part Cherokee. The family was not wealthy. They ran a feed mill and cider press in rural Springfield Township, grinding grain for local farmers and pressing apples when the harvest came. Art grew up surrounded by machinery: gears, pulleys, belts, engines. The mechanical rhythm of the mill was the soundtrack of his childhood. Money was tight during the Great Depression. If something broke, you did not replace it. You fixed it yourself or you went without. Art learned to look at broken machines and see possibilities instead of problems. He became resourceful, stubborn, a scrapper. When Art was 13 years old, he entered the 1939 All-American Soapbox Derby. Kids built gravity-powered cars from wood and scrap, then raced them down a hill in Akron. Art felt something click inside him that day. The speed, the roar of the crowd, the thrill of building something with his own hands. He was hooked. That feeling would define the rest of his life. World War II began when Art was barely old enough to enlist. He joined the United States Navy before finishing high school and was sent to diesel mechanic school. The Navy recognized that Art had a natural gift for understanding engines. He could take them apart, see what was wrong, and fix them. He was assigned to work on landing craft in the Pacific Ocean and participated in the invasion of Okinawa, one of the bloodiest battles of the war. He came home 3 years later as a petty officer second class, with skills that would serve him for decades. He understood how powerful engines worked. He knew how to make broken things run again. After the war, Art returned to Ohio and the family feed mill, but he could not get racing out of his blood. The sound of engines, the smell of oil and fuel, the challenge of going faster, it called to him. In 1952, Art and his older half-brother Walt decided to build a race car. They had no money for fancy parts or professional components, so they used what they could find. Art welded together an old Oldsmobile 6-cylinder engine and a Packard rear axle. He needed a front axle, but did not have one. So he grabbed a landing gear strut from a junked airplane, bolted it to the front of the frame, and used an airplane wheel to steer. The car looked ridiculous. It had 3 wheels and a gangly, awkward body. When it came time to paint, the brothers looked around the shop and found a half-empty can of green tractor paint left over from a farm job. They slathered it on. At their first race, the track announcer took one look at the bizarre machine rolling up to the starting line. He grabbed his microphone and shouted to the crowd, "Here it comes, the green monster." People laughed. Art did not care. He pressed the gas pedal and screamed down the drag strip at 86 miles per hour, or 138 kilometers per hour. It was not particularly fast, but it was a start. More importantly, the name stuck. From that day forward, Every car Art Arfons built would be called the Green Monster, even the ones that were not green. Throughout the 1950s, Art kept building cars. Each one was faster than the last. He discovered something that changed everything. You could buy surplus World War II aircraft engines for almost nothing. Powerful Allison V-12 engines that had once powered fighter planes were sitting in scrapyards and military surplus lots, treated like junk. While wealthy racing teams spent fortunes on custom-built machines, Art was picking through junkyards, finding treasures others had thrown away. "I went to Allison Engines because you could buy them for $35, Art later explained. You could not even buy a Magneto for $100 at that time. He once traded a $50 electric motor for a massive 27-liter supercharged Allison V12. That engine, in anyone else's hands, would have been a rusted paperweight. In Art's hands, it became the heart of a championship drag racer. His approach to engineering was completely unorthodox. Most racing teams employed trained engineers who drew up detailed blueprints before building anything. Art did the opposite. "I usually build the car first," he admitted, "and then go back and make a design of the construction." When the tire company Firestone sent a team of engineers to build special wheels for one of his cars, they asked Art for a blueprint. He did not have one. He just handed them a hub and said, "Here, use this." His competitors had millions of dollars, corporate sponsors, and teams of specialists. Art had his own two hands, some leftover tractor paint, and a conviction that anybody could build a race car if they were willing to work hard enough. By the end of the 1950s, Art Arfons was setting records. His Green Monster drag cars hit 150 miles per hour, or 241 kilometers per hour in the quarter mile. Then 172, then 191. He beat legendary drag racer Don Garlits. He invented the overhead roll cage in 1954, a safety device that would later become mandatory in all drag racing. He pioneered the use of parachutes to slow cars down after high-speed runs. But drag racing was not enough anymore. Art had his eyes on something bigger, the world land speed record. The world land speed record is simple to explain, but almost impossible to achieve. You build the fastest car on Earth, take it to a long, flat stretch of ground, and drive as fast as you can. The current record holder is the fastest person who has ever traveled in a wheeled vehicle. In the early 1960s, that record stood just over 400 miles per hour, or 644 kilometers per hour. Art knew that to go that fast, he needed a jet engine. The problem was that jet engines were not exactly available at the local auto parts store. They were military technology, powerful, expensive, and tightly controlled by the government. But Art Arfons had built his entire career on finding treasure in other people's trash. In 1963, he heard about a military surplus dealer in Florida who had a damaged jet engine for sale. The engine was a General Electric J79 turbojet, originally designed for the F-104 Starfighter fighter jet. The J79 was one of the most advanced engines ever built. It produced 17,500 pounds of thrust with its afterburner engaged. That was enough power to push a fighter jet past twice the speed of sound. This particular engine had been scrapped by the Air Force because it had sucked a bolt into its intake during operation. The bolt had torn through the engine's internal components, destroying about 60 of its nearly 1,000 turbine blades. The military considered it worthless. Art considered it an opportunity. He drove to Florida with a bus he had converted for hauling equipment. When he arrived at the scrap dealer's yard, there it was, 17 feet of aviation technology, sitting in the dirt like a piece of junk. The dealer wanted $600. Art did not negotiate. He did not try to talk the price down. He just handed over the cash, loaded the engine into his bus, and drove home to Ohio. "I did not try to chisel down the price," Art recalled later. "I never said nothing, just gave him the money, and we put it in the bus." He had just bought a piece of classified military technology for the price of a used car. Art hauled the engine back to his shop on Pickle Road, a rutted narrow lane on the outskirts of Akron. The shop consisted of 2 large tin buildings that looked, according to one magazine writer, like old airport hangars out of yesteryear. Inside, Art had accumulated one of the largest collections of surplus jet engines in private hands. Now he had the biggest prize of all. But he had a problem. Art did not know how jet engines worked. He had never touched one before. And the J79 was incredibly complex. A maze of hydraulic lines, fuel systems, and electronic components. Worse, all the service manuals for the J79 were classified top secret by the United States military. Art could not exactly call up the Air Force and ask for instructions. So he did what any sensible person would do. He called General Electric, the company that made the engine, and asked if they could send him a repair manual. The response was immediate and hostile. "You do not have that engine," the General Electric representative told him. "You cannot have that engine." Art insisted that he did, in fact, have the engine. It was sitting in his shed. He had a receipt. A day later, an Air Force colonel from Washington showed up at Art's farm shop. The officer informed Art that the J79 was classified military equipment and that he was not allowed to possess it. Art showed him the sales receipt. "I said, well, here is my piece of paper where I bought it, because you guys did not want it and had thrown it away," Art remembered. The colonel argued. Art refused to budge. Finally, the officer stormed off. A few days later, General Electric sent Art what he described as a real nasty letter, informing him that the J79 was manufactured exclusively for the Marine Corps and Air Force and should never be installed in a race car. Art's response was simple. He ignored them completely. Art Arfons never received the letter, he said later with a grin. Now Art faced his biggest challenge, making a broken jet engine run again. He had no manual, no training, and no help from the people who built it. All he had was mechanical intuition developed over a lifetime of making broken things work. "I had my first jet engine for a month before I had the guts to pull it apart," he admitted. "I got it out of a can, and it had more hydraulic lines and gizmos on it than you would believe. I did not think I could ever do it." But Art was nothing if not brave. He started disassembling the engine, removing every component he did not absolutely need. All the military avionics, the extra hydraulic systems, the specialized controls. He stripped the J79 down to its essential core: oil lines, fuel lines, and ignition. For the damaged turbine blades, Art came up with an ingenious solution. He could not straighten the bent blades, and he could not get replacements, so he simply removed them. But here is where his brilliance showed. He knew that removing random blades would throw the engine out of balance, causing dangerous vibrations. So, for every blade he removed, he also removed the blade directly opposite it, at 180 degrees around the turbine wheel. This kept the engine balanced despite missing parts. In total, he removed about 60 blades. He figured the engine had more than enough power without them. Now came the moment of truth. Art needed to test the engine. He did not have a test facility. He did not have instrumentation, so he did what seemed logical to a man who had spent his life improvising. He strapped the engine to a homemade frame and chained it between 2 trees behind his shop. Then, he fired it up. The results were spectacular and terrifying. The jet blast dried up a small creek behind the shop. It blew boulders across the property. It shattered windows for hundreds of yards in every direction. And when Art engaged the afterburner, the blast incinerated a neighbor's chicken coop. Police came running. Neighbors threatened lawsuits. One angry farmer showed up waving a .45 caliber pistol, but the engine ran. Art's $600 pile of junk was alive. With a working engine, Art now had to build a car around it. He had no sponsors, no corporate backing, no team of engineers, just himself and his neighbor, Ed Snyder. Ed worked the night shift at a tire factory, operating a molding press. Every morning after his shift ended, he would drive over to Art's shop and work on the car until early afternoon. Then he would catch a few hours of sleep before heading back to the factory. Between the two of them, they put in an estimated 5,000 hours of labor. The car they built was a masterpiece of creative recycling. The rear axle came from a 1947 Ford truck. The front axle came from a 1937 Lincoln. The steering system came from a 1955 Packard. The frame was welded together from chromoly steel tubing. The body was mostly hand-formed aluminum, though the nose cone was fiberglass because it was easier to shape. Art designed an innovative safety feature, an adjustable wing mounted over the front axle. The wing was connected to hydraulics that sensed when the car's front end started to lift off the ground. When that happened, the wing would automatically adjust its angle to push the nose back down. At speeds approaching 600 miles per hour or 966 kilometers per hour, even a slight lift could send the car cartwheeling. For brakes, Art installed heavy-duty disc brakes at all four wheels. But he knew brakes alone could not stop a car traveling at over 500 miles per hour. He fabricated a parachute release system using a mechanism he built from a 12-gauge shotgun. Total cost, when finished, was approximately $10,000, about 5% of what his best-funded competitors had spent on their cars. The car emerged from Art's shed in 1964, painted red and blue. Despite the colors, everyone still called it the Green Monster. The place where land speed records are set is one of the strangest landscapes on Earth, the Bonneville Salt Flats in northwestern Utah. Thousands of years ago, this area was covered by a prehistoric lake. When the lake dried up, it left behind a perfectly flat expanse of salt, hard, white, and stretching to the horizon in every direction. Bonneville is sort of an eerie place, Art said. You look down that emptiness, and it is just eerie as hell. The Salt Flats offered something no other location could: a natural runway more than 12 miles long, flat as a pool table, where cars could accelerate to speeds impossible anywhere else. In October 1964, Art loaded his Green Monster onto a trailer and made the long drive to Utah. He had no support crew to speak of, just a handful of family members and friends who had agreed to help. His competitors arrived with massive teams, spare parts, backup vehicles, and catering tents. Art arrived with a homemade car, a borrowed pickup truck, and determination. On October 5, 1964, Art Arfons climbed into the cramped cockpit of the Green Monster. The seat was so tight he could barely move. The controls were simple: a steering wheel with buttons for the engine shutoff and parachute release, pedals for steering at high speed, and a throttle for the jet. The morning was cool and still. Perfect conditions. Art hit the ignition. Behind him, the J79 screamed to life. He eased forward, feeling the thrust build. Then he pushed the throttle forward. The acceleration was brutal. The salt flats blurred into a white smear. The roar of the engine became a physical force pressing against his back. Art shot through the measured mile, the official timing zone, and kept going. When he turned around and made his return run, officials checked their equipment twice to make sure it was working correctly. Art Arfons had just traveled 434.02 miles per hour, or 698.48 kilometers per hour, faster than any human being in history. He was the fastest man on Earth, but Art was not finished. 3 weeks later, on October 27, 1964, he returned to the salt flats and pushed the Green Monster even harder. This time, the run nearly killed him. Art blasted through the measured mile at 536.71 miles per hour, or 863.75 kilometers per hour. But during the second pass, disaster struck. One of his tires exploded at over 500 miles per hour. The car began to shudder violently. Art fought the steering wheel, struggling to keep the Green Monster from flipping. His brakes failed. His parachute malfunctioned. Somehow, he brought the car to a stop. He had just set another world record and survived a failure that should have been fatal. Art took the Green Monster home to Ohio and spent the next year rebuilding and improving the car. He made it lighter, stronger, more aerodynamic. And in November 1965, he returned to Bonneville for one more attempt. If you have been enjoying this deep dive into automotive history and want to see more stories like this, consider subscribing to the channel. We bring you the untold stories of backyard innovators, engineering marvels, and the people who dared to push the limits of what was possible. On November 7, 1965, Art Arfons achieved what seemed impossible for a man working out of a farm shed in Ohio. He pushed the Green Monster to 576.553 miles per hour, or 927.87 kilometers per hour, nearly 600 miles per hour, in a car built from junkyard parts and held together by his own stubborn will. Once again, a tire exploded during the run. Once again, Art survived. The record would only stand for 8 days before being broken. But Art Arfons had proven his point. A backyard mechanic with no formal training, no corporate sponsors, and a $600 engine had competed with the best-funded racing teams in the world and won. Art could not stay away from Bonneville. The Salt Flats called to him, he said, like a woman you keep quarreling with but cannot stay away from. In November 1966, he returned with an improved Green Monster, determined to reclaim the record. The car was faster than ever. During test runs, Art was hitting speeds well over 600 miles per hour. On November 17, 1966, everything went wrong. Art launched. Down the Salt, at full afterburner. He tore through the measured mile at 585 miles per hour, or 941.42 kilometers per hour, and kept accelerating. Past the timing zone, he hit 610 miles per hour, or 981.64 kilometers per hour. Then the right front wheel bearing seized. At 610 miles per hour, the Green Monster veered sharply to the right and launched into the air. The car flipped upside down. There was an enormous fireball. The car came down hard, bounced, and went end over end. Twice. It slid on its side for what seemed like forever, kicking up a rooster tail of salt. When the wreckage finally stopped, more than a mile from where the accident began, rescuers raced toward the twisted metal, expecting to find a body. Instead, they found Art Arfons, bleeding from cuts on his face, trying to unbuckle his harness. A steel bar had bent across his chest, pinning him in place. The helicopter pilot grabbed the bar and heaved it straight so Art could climb out. His injuries were remarkably minor. Cuts, bruises, friction burns, and salt that had been forced under his eyelids and scraped his corneas. Guinness World Records would later recognize the crash as the fastest car accident anyone has ever survived. When doctors asked Art how he had managed to live through it, he had a simple explanation. What saved me is 15 pounds I gained from eating too much. I was crammed into that cockpit so tight I could not even move a muscle. His first words upon regaining consciousness were characteristic Art. "Will you call my wife and tell her I am okay?" She did not want me to go fast. His second question was about the car. How is the car? Can she be repaired? Art Arfons never stopped racing. Even after the horrific 1966 crash, he rebuilt and returned to Bonneville multiple times. In 1989, at age 63, and after heart bypass surgery, he showed up with a new Green Monster. This one weighed just 1,800 pounds, or 816 kilograms, with only 2 wheels. The car left the ground at 350 miles per hour, or 563 kilometers per hour. He rebuilt it with 4 wheels and tried again. He also became a legend in tractor pulling, building jet-powered tractors that competed against machines costing 10 times as much. Art Arfons died on December 3, 2007, at his home in Ohio. He was 81 years old. According to his family's wishes, he was buried with a wrench in each hand, a jar of Bonneville salt, and a J79 engine repair manual. The very document the government had tried to keep from him decades earlier. His induction into the International Motorsports Hall of Fame was announced 3 days after his death. Art left behind more than records. He left behind proof that formal training and big budgets are not everything. That ingenuity and determination can compete with money and resources. That a man from a farm in Ohio, working in a tin shed with his neighbor, could build something that traveled 576 miles per hour using junkyard parts and an engine he bought for $600. "Building cars is something I have always liked to do," Art once said. "It is something I think anybody can do if they want to. It just takes lots of patience and hard work. I never had any training for it." The establishment told Art Arfons that he could not have a jet engine. They told him he could not build a record car in his barn. They told him he could not compete with professional racing teams. Art Arfons did not listen to any of it. He just handed them his receipt, climbed into his homemade rocket car, and showed the world what a junkyard genius could do. Against all odds, with nothing but scrap metal and determination, a backyard mechanic from Ohio became the fastest man on Earth. His story remains a testament to what one person can achieve when they refuse to accept what others say is impossible. Art Arfons proved that you do not need a fancy degree or millions of dollars to chase your dreams. You just need the courage to try, the patience to learn, and the stubbornness to never give up. The Green Monster may have been built from junk, but Art Arfons turned that junk into legend. And that legend continues to inspire anyone who has ever looked at a pile of scrap and seen possibility. If you enjoyed learning about Art Arfons and his incredible journey, subscribe to the channel for more stories of innovators who changed the world from their backyards. These are the stories that remind us that greatness can come from anywhere, as long as you are willing to work for it.